I'm Jeff Cook.
And I'm TJ Wilson.
And this is Around the Circle.
I'm walking slowly. I'm taking my time. All I could talking is starting to rhyme. I'm letting go of lonely, letting go of strife. I just can't get enough of this beautiful life.
The Enneagram is a map of the human personality. It's a tool for navigating relationships. It creates language for what motivates us and helps us look at the way we look at everything else. Most importantly, the Enneagram's a mirror because sometimes you need help seeing yourself. My name is Jeff Cook. I'm a longtime professor of philosophy in Greeley, Colorado. With me is TJ Wilson, coffee guru, lover of theology, and Enneagram ninja.
Hello.
Boss.
Hey.
We have not one but two introductions to make today. We're getting fancy.
Excellent. Just more and more guests. That's what we're building more and more. Next time it'll be 3.
We got juggler. We're professional jugglers with everybody. We have the Dr. Billy Schewee with us. Dr. Schewee did his PhD work in Enneagram and education. Thrilled to welcome you, Billy, to the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be on, for sure.
And also is Professor Kelly Langley Cook. Professor Cook taught high school for 15 years and 8 years in a collegiate environment, and she knows more about the Enneagram than anyone else here. Isn't that right, Kelly?
Nope. Incorrect.
Kelly knows more about education than anyone I've ever spoken to, and we brought her on to talk shop with us. It's going to be a good overlap. We're going to talk about education. We're going to talk about Enneagram, but I bet you that as we talk, this is going to go out into other avenues like parenting and your work environment. So for those of you who care nothing about school, stick around. There's going to be some good stuff. But Billy, we got Billy's dissertation last year, got a chance to read through it, have longed to have him on the podcast. And so just to start us out, you do work not only in education, but obviously do some stuff with your wife and Enneagram and parenting. Where is Enneagram overlap with the work that you're presently doing?
Yeah, so I work with my wife, Joey Schewee, who is an Enneagram master for sure. I'm daughter of Suzanne Stabile, for those who don't know. And she and I years ago started working on an Enneagram and parenting series. What we realized is that when Suzanne was going out and teaching in her various arenas, that topic kept coming up, and she said, I feel like it's not mine to do, but you guys should really research that and go down that road. So we did. We took the work that we had researched over all of our many years of knowing the Enneagram. We started putting together some focus groups of people in the community who knew the Enneagram, and we just got together and talked and gathered feedback, and that led to us being able to create a training, which we do whenever we can. And we also run an Instagram page. It's at Enneagram Parents. It's not, you don't have to be a parent to benefit from it, but there are some parenting specific things that we go through from the perspective of both the parents and of the child. And so we really feel like that could benefit others. Other things that I'm working on, my day job is as a program director at the University of Texas at Dallas. I work with high school students to prepare them for college, and then there's a scholarship component tied to that, so I also work with current college students. And I very much feel like that could be a college course. I know it's offered in some schools. I'm working with the powers that be at UTD to make that a college course, so that hopefully will be in existence sooner rather than later. And then I've turned my dissertation into a training for educators. So I'd love to just work with teachers, administrators, and the like in a school setting to be able to help them understand their Enneagram numbers and then use that accordingly. So parenting, college, working with teachers, that's what I'm trying to put out into the world.
Bang.
Thanks.
Kelly, you're in education. When does Enneagram come up for you?
So it first came up for me, well, truthfully, it comes up for me every minute of every day because my husband and my best friend have an Enneagram podcast and they're obsessed with it and it's the language we speak. But it first came up for me when you all started getting into it and I was medium interested, but when we realized how crucial it was for our parenting to be able to speak the language of Enneagram with our children who are very interested and well studied in the Enneagram, particularly our oldest child who's an autistic 8. And so the empowerment of having a language for the motivations that no one else was understanding, particularly motivation to be away from loud noises and sounds and control their own body and their own space, was huge. For our younger child who's a 5, to be able to tell us that they didn't think people were listening or understood them, or that they didn't have, I mean, one of the quick examples is about 5 years ago, Beckett was feeling really sick, and it didn't matter what Jeff and I said. So we just said, you go Google it and tell us how you feel and what you want to do about it. And all of a sudden things were a lot better. And so after doing a lot of that work, because it was benefiting our parenting, I actually invited Jeff and TJ in to come and speak to my class a couple of times with the student teacher. So I'm the Director of Social Studies Education, is my fancy 3 title at the University of Northern Colorado. It basically means if you want to teach social studies and you go to University of Northern Colorado, you have to see me at least 4 semesters. So for good or for bad, I get to see those student teachers for a long time. And after having them come in a few times, they absolutely went through the numbers and the motivations. I started to just frankly steal all of their material, because I think anyone who studies Enneagram, when you have an hour or 2, you can't do anything. Let's be honest. It's just you can. So what I've changed it into is not talking about the numbers, names, stances, types, any of that. I literally just want to get at the end of 2 hours that my future teachers understand there are 9 types of learners. They are all motivated differently, and only 1 out of the 9 is motivated in the same way you are as a teacher. And that has been outrageously powerful, just to get to 9 types of learners and an understanding of that. So even if they can't remember the material, I know that they walk into their classroom and they say, oh, okay, I have to remember a few students will be motivated like I am. Most will not. How am I reading them? What am I seeing? And then hopefully they want to dive deeper. So that's where the Enneagram shows up for me in my stealing of your material, everyone. And Billy, now I'm going to steal yours too, because I've now read your beautiful dissertation and I'm just adding it to the pile.
You got it. It's all you.
Lots of practicality there. And that's actually, I was curious, Billy, as you're in your present work, when you're doing counseling with students, are you typing them? Are you doing typing work with them so that you can send them in worthwhile ways?
You know, I don't use the term Enneagram often. I'm working on that. People, as you guys know, it's a crapshoot as to how they're going to receive that information. Mm-hmm. But I try to just listen to them and get an idea of at least what stance they might be representing before I provide feedback. And it's worked really well. You know, I'll have students that come to me with disagreements with roommates or issues that they are having with professors. Mm-hmm. And I try to meet them in the middle based on what Enneagram, at least stance, I think they might be in. And it tends to work. And so, again, reason number 1 million why the Enneagram is so great.
Right.
Billy, can I ask you a question working with those students? So I know the cardinal rule is you don't type someone. Right. But when someone does come into your office and they have a need, do you find yourself, like you were saying, at least try to see what their stance is maybe? Do you find yourself trying to read into how they're expressing the problem so that you can help them from the foundation of what their number might be? Do you do that, or do you try to keep back from that?
No, I do it. I have an idea because I know the students, but then I'll ask probing questions here or there if I'm trying to split hairs between one number or another. And that most of the time works, and that allows me to provide the feedback that I think will be most beneficial to them in a way that they'll hear it, for the sake of, number 1, effectiveness, but 2, efficiency, right? Mm-hmm. And that tends to work. So I use it.
That's because it's not just about helping them solve their problem. It's also helping them understand their problem.
Absolutely.
And sometimes you have to get a little bit deeper into, like, what is your motivation here? What problem are you actually trying to solve?
Right. Yeah. And something else that I try to use is, as a 9, I can't help but see all sides in any given scenario. And so what I try to do is put myself in the shoes of the other person or people that the student is having an issue with, maybe, and give them some perspective on that, some things that they may not be considering that might help inform, whatever future decisions they make with respect to that topic. So Enneagram all around.
Yeah.
I would love to get into each of the types. When thinking about ones and success for a one teacher, setting them up to feel good about themselves and really to release the strengths that they have into a classroom, what are the things that go through your mind?
Reflecting on talking with the one teacher that's featured in my work, she talked a lot about the things that ones typically find important to them. She used the word perfectionist quite a bit, the word right. She talked about that voice in her head. She also, God bless her, at the time of the study, she was also going to school for her master's. So she was extremely stressed out, all the work in the evenings and things, and you could kind of see that and hear that in her voice. And then also to listen to how those characteristics sort of played into her work as a teacher. She talked about, with respect to lesson planning, Kelly, you mentioned this. If you've been teaching for 5 minutes, you know that you can spend 5 hours on a lesson plan, and then the first 5 minutes, the entire thing is thrown out the window because of this, that, or the other. That's just the way education works. And that can be maddening for people that are more stringent and focused, like a one. But it was great to hear that she knew that because she knows the Enneagram, because she knows she's a one. She wants to spend a great amount of time and create the best looking lesson plan and hope and pray that it works out that way, but knowing that it's probably not, and then having the space to allow for that flexibility, that's growth. The other thing that I wanted to highlight, and that is, regardless of the Enneagram number that these teachers represent, imagine a scenario where your administrators and your fellow teaching colleagues know what number you are, and they can provide feedback to you in that way, right? I heard teachers of all types talk about how, because they all know each other and what numbers they are, they know who to go to for what and when. Based on their types. Sometimes we just want a friend that's going to listen to us vent. They're just going to, give us a hug and let us cry and pat us on the back, and then we go on about our lives. Sometimes we want to go to somebody that's going to come up with a solution to what we perceive as a problem. And it'll be objective and logic-based and fast processing, and they'll help, right? Those kinds of things help a ton.
I think, too, if I may, one of the cool things is when the one knows they're a one, and I'm just going to go to this, wants calm in the classroom. That is because it's the right way. And if I may, it's the white right way to have a classroom. And I think for a one, if they could see research, for example, our town is more Latine than it is white. So we have about 52% Latine population, about 49% white population. If I were working with a one, we might look at some literature to see that Hispanic, Mexican-American families are more communal. They might speak over each other. They might like music on at the same time. It might be louder. And that would be more comfortable, and that would be more accessible for the learner to feel like they were in a more busy environment. I think a one who wants to do it right might personally enjoy calm, but would be able to let that go if they knew they were doing it right for their learners by letting there be some chaos, and good chaos, the good learning, connected community chaos. And so that's the thing that I'd love to see, is that if I know that this is how the one is perceiving things, but I also know a one wants to do it right. And particularly what I notice with ones is they want to do it right with other human beings. They care so much more about other people than themselves. And if they know they can take care of their students by letting some chaos happen, maybe this is a little example off the cuff, but they might be able to shift and realize that the noise is great and it helps their learners to be comfortable and therefore access the material. They can shift. I'm not going to do that same kind of coaching with a 7, who first of all will probably not say I want it calm, but that's just not going to, we're not going to go read literature as a 7. That's not going to be useful. But my 1 and 5 teacher, we're probably going to read something together so they can tell me what they see in that and if they see anything useful.
Yeah, that's very well said.
Thoughts, teacher?
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, I don't interact with teachers nearly as often as, let me rephrase that. I don't interact with teachers in the classroom nearly as often as any of you people.
But they do get a lot of coffee to make it into their classroom in the morning, for sure.
Yeah. I get the other side of the teachers, the part that the kids don't ever get to see. But also, I have been working with Jeff, who is a teacher, for a long time, and we have been in sort of classroom settings a lot. And I think a lot of what I read about the oneness of teaching can apply to, let's hold Jeff up as a sort of like example of being a different type of one. Like the perfectionism, the word right is kind of weird, but getting at like what's underneath those words, what's underneath those things, like the desire for having a long prep time has so much to do with wanting to make sure that they know the beats, that they know but like where they need to get to within the lesson so that they end the lesson correctly. It's not necessarily that you have to follow it's like steps A, B, C, and D, but you still have to get to step G, right? And so you need to know how to get there. And if you have that preparation in front of you, then like you can figure out where to pivot, where to sort of throw the thing, but you still have to land the plane. And so there's a sense of needing to have all of that in hand so that you can react in the classroom. And like there is so much about oneness, like doing it, because if you're a good effectual teacher, you will get the class to step G. And I think that's what's behind some of this perfectionism and that desire for like a long planning time. And I see that reflected very clearly in Jeff, even though I would not use the word perfectionist for him.
Stuff I heard there is how difficult teaching as a profession actually is, that there's the overlap of your type and your audience is not only the collective group of students, but it's also the individual students that are in there. And so it may be the case that having a more loud, obnoxious, less structured environment for your students may be great for 90% of the class. And then you got the neurodivergent kid. Given their type, how they oversee the environment, going to be core here, both as teachers and parents. The second thing, just as the thing that I was hearing is future planning ends up being one of the pivots because I'm thinking repressed. And so if things go off the rails, like it's actually incredibly difficult for me to just get re-centered, given, as it were, my weaknesses, given the places that I kind of struggle. And so as a teacher, trying to set everyone up for success by future planning is one of the few cards that I may have. And so I assume as an administrator, I assume as a teacher coach, being able to say, look, here's how you could work on your flexibility and some of the skills you could implement, but here are some of the skills that you really have in terms of designing a classroom that could be important to ones. Final thoughts on ones, or you want to move to twos, Billy?
I think we nailed it. Yeah, I don't think I could say it better than you as a one. So yeah, I won't try.
Well, what do you think?
I have a question for Billy. Why does every female elementary school teacher think she's a two, and why are they wrong?
Yeah, I noticed that when I first started learning the Enneagram. You know, Joey and I, we went to every workshop that Suzanne did. And early on, it was apparent to me there was this demographic of ladies who just heard two and just said, that's me. Like, because I think that there's this generalization, there's this stereotype of this 1950s American housewife that their role is to support others, basically, right? And this is 2025, and things aren't like that, and we're motivated differently, and it doesn't really work that way anyway. But I think stereotypes do still exist. And so take your example, Kelly, just the female elementary school teacher, society sort of just views them as that stereotype, I think. And I think sometimes people lean into those. And again, you don't get to pick your Enneagram number.
Yeah.
You know, you are who you are. And the best thing you can do is live in that space, all the good and all the bad, and just learn and grow from there. So yeah.
And I think women are often, they're just put in a position to be told 2 is what you should be. And so I like that you did a lot of work on the 2, and I think it's really great because I think we have to unpack particularly the 2 for teachers. Even if they're not a 2, they can feel like they should be motivated like a 2.
Billy, on 2s, like if you're working with a 2 teacher, what are some of the things that you want to highlight or are on your radar?
Sure. Yeah. Feeling was a common theme in interviewing this specific Enneagram 2 as a teacher. Feelings of the classroom, feelings of the individual students in the classroom, feelings of students in other classrooms. That was a central focus. I mean, it just was. It was hilarious to listen to it because I wasn't trying to get them to answer specifically. It just sort of worked out that way. So I was very thankful for that. But it was interesting too. So go back to the correlation to the 1. Lesson planning played a big role, like being prepared on paper for the class each day was very important. And my Enneagram 2 struggled with lesson planning in general because it's her at a computer or on a pad writing out what's going to happen with no one there to be in relationship with, right, at the time. And so I think the rationalization was, well, it's just going to get blown up anyway, so why spend a lot of time on lesson planning? Let's just get to the classroom where the students are, right? And that was the common theme. It was with respect to classroom management, feelings of the students were centrally focused, providing feedback. How the students are going to receive the feedback was very important to this particular teacher, right? Very nurturing. You mentioned it, Kelly. She was referred to as the school mom. And one of the things that I found interesting, and I find this common with 2s in general, not just specifically educators, and that is boundaries. Having a hard time saying no. She almost got a little teary when she was talking about how, a teacher or a parent might email her late at night and she's going to drop what she's doing and answer. A fellow teaching colleague will come by with a specific issue that they're experiencing and she'll drop what she's doing to help them in lieu of whatever she has going on, which is a million things like all teachers have. And so I found that to be interesting. Feeling centric with respect to her day-to-day as a teacher and struggling most with boundaries, saying no when it isn't necessarily hers to do.
And I wonder if you saw a struggle with boundaries when she says that her students check on her. So on one end, that's very endearing, but I think too, an administrator, it can be a little red flag. And I'm not trying to pick on this subject at all. I'm just saying with the idea at all that those boundaries of, it is actually beautiful and we want to teach our students to care about us, but we need to not need that. And so that can be a slippery slope with a 2 who is doing so much for not just her students in her class, but a school in general, probably hearing very little thank you, and you did that so well, and we really appreciate that you brought treats to the teacher's lounge. But if you get it from students, it can get to be a dangerous place because then you want that from students, and then the relationship becomes unbalanced and unhealthy.
Yeah, very well said.
That's what I wanted to bring up as well. It seems like 2s, 3s, and 4s may have that as a struggle as teachers and even as parents, is trying to gain your value from the attention you get from those who your role is to serve and elevate. You got thoughts there, Teach?
Yeah, a lot of what I'm thinking about has already been mentioned. Thanks, Billy, for covering all my points. I was also thinking, too, in contrast with other types, because I think especially in the conversation about like female elementary school teachers who are not 2s are going to have learned a lot of the behavior that 2s might exhibit, but they don't have the natural instincts. I have an aunt that considers herself the group mom in a lot of scenarios, but she is absolutely not a 2. She is an 8. And she uses her energy to take care of other people for their own good. And if someone were to say to her face that she has no idea what other people are feeling, she would be deeply offended, regardless of its truth. Sure. And I think the idea that like there is an instinct, there is a natural, unspoken, unchosen ability to draw on the feelings of other people, to pick up these kids. Like I think of the 2s who might have like the drawer of snacks, right? Because they could create a whole lesson plan, but if 5 of their students are coming to class hungry, they're not going to learn anything. Right. So there is a sense of being prepared to offer the things that the students need before making the lesson plan the most important thing. And I think that there are a lot of teachers who think that they have that ability, but they don't. Like, it's just not part of who they naturally are, and they're trying to come at it from different angles, right? Yeah. That was the thing that I was thinking about.
Last word on 2s before we pivot to the 3s. What's your thoughts on 3s?
I think we nailed it. Yeah, what I heard quite a bit dealt with efficiency, success. The way that this particular teacher runs her classroom, she sets very high expectations. She knows each student individually, and she pushes each of those students to maximize their potential and won't let it go, right? Is relentless about meeting their potential, which I find fast. I mean, that's every teacher should, right? And another thing that I found interesting too with this particular teacher, she's very young, and she talked about how she just naturally rises among the ranks quickly, right? She's department lead. There are certain committees that has been asked to be the leader of. And I think she really leans into that, right? How the work that you do, the level of work that you put into something is important, and you should be recognized for said level of work put into it. That's for her students. And so those were the major takeaways for me.
What do you think, Kel?
I think I have more critique for the 3 than praise, because actually a 3 is set up pretty well to be a teacher. It is a motivation that works well in that environment, especially upper grades. I would say when you get to past 8th grade, you're really in a good space to have your students show off and perform for you and get scholarships and awards. And so the 3 I saw a lot with that 3 teacher was the earn. The students are going to earn it. They're going to earn it because the 3 has earned it and they've worked to earn it. And the hard thing is for the 3, for both themselves and the people they work with and the students they teach, is to love them when they don't earn it. And that really, I'm sorry to be so honest, but it really is hard for us if someone hasn't worked hard and done the things we've said to do and done as much as we've done, they didn't earn it. So the students who do that are going to be those teachers' pets and their favorite, and they are going to shine. And the students who, every single student in that room deserves love and respect and regard, and they're not going to get it as often. And the 3 will really have to work to care about those students equally and see them to have equal value, because in this, teacher and myself included, it's like, you need to earn it. Show it to me and I will give it to you. But human beings need unconditional positive regard, and especially little human beings who are navigating parents' divorces and food insecurity and all sorts of things, just bullying, and they may not be able to earn it from that teacher. And so that was just something that really stuck out to me, is if you can earn it, you're going to do great with this teacher, with a 3 teacher. And if a 3 is not self-aware and not constantly keeping themselves in check, if you do not earn it, you're going to have a really hard time with a 3 teacher. And again, that's kind of maybe an immature one. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Sure. No, what I was going to say is I remember my days as a principal, and, I did as much training as I could. And Todd Whitaker he's an author on teaching practices and administrative practices in schools. He does a great job. And one of his principles is you essentially are going to have a small group of teachers that are going to show up every day, regardless of who's there, and they're going to work their tails off because that's the right thing to do. You're going to have a small group of teachers who, no matter how much training you give to them, they're just not great at teaching. And then the wide range, the biggest group of teachers are somewhere in the middle, right? And they're going to go to either side dependent upon their situation, their level of training, their level of commitment, those sorts of things. And so what you said, Kelly, reminded me, a 3 who is a teacher wants to be recognized for the work that they do. And they're also comparing to their fellow colleagues. And if there's ever an imbalance of recognition, they're astutely aware of that.
Yes.
And so what Todd Whitaker would say is, of those three levels of teachers, the rock stars, the somewhere in the middle, or the ones who just aren't really getting it done and kind of aren't very good, where should a principal focus their most energy, right? And I said, oh, the ones at the bottom, right? You need to bring them up. And his answer is focus on the ones at the top. And his rationale is, if the teachers who are showing up every day and doing their very best and they're performing at a high level and they're shining and they're head and shoulders above others, and they are the ones who receive the most attention from administration, the idea there is everybody else is either going to try and rise to those ranks or they're going to feel left out. And then maybe the best thing is for them to move on. So it's like a natural weeding out sort of thing. And that sounds harsh, but in the end, the job is what's best for students. And so you kind of have to remove some of those touchy-feely aspects of that. And I find threes to be right there, right? Essentially administrators are being taught to have favorites. As long as it's merit-based, that's okay, right? You get what that person gets if you do what that person does, essentially perform at that high level. And so one of the biggest mistakes I made was, as a young principal, trying to treat everybody the same. I've got my rock star teacher. I just kind of pop in every once in a while, say, hey, thanks for being awesome. And then I'm not in there for another 6 weeks because I'm spending another, 2 or 3 hours over at this teacher's classroom across the hall who's just not really getting it done. And they're having all kinds of issues, right? And then that teacher who's doing great looks up and goes, well, why should I give all this effort when I'm being treated the exact same as somebody else who's not giving half the effort they should? You know what I'm saying? And so there's something to be said for wanting to achieve and be recognized for that, both from the perspective of a 3 and for those who are working with a 3, and for that matter, every other number as well.
Yeah. For gifted kids, a bad practice is give gifted kids more work. That's something that, we have kids all over a spectrum. Gifted is a special needs child and they need something different and it is not more work. But I will say for 3s, it sometimes is more work because if you give them a title and you give them a responsibility, it does feel like a reward. So to be department chair, to have titles given to you, that's something I've noticed that my department chair in the history department gives me lots of titles. And they're like social media specialists, which really just means I put stuff on our Instagram. But then I'm like, oh, well, thank you. I'm, I have this thing. And so it's a funny thing. But for a 3, I think sometimes when they want to earn it, they just have to be aware that everyone else shouldn't have to do that. But they do want to earn it and they do want that title. And so the special attention, like you're saying, is you actually can't be in there with the 3 when they're performing fine. You're triaging things and they're doing fine. And so you get to pop in and say you're great. And that's what they get. But sometimes giving them some sort of elevated or a challenge, hey, come beyond this leadership council, or why don't you show up to the PTA meeting? They need a teacher there who's going to guide them. That kind of thing can actually be a gift for a 3.
Yeah.
And I was thinking sort of on the other side of that like thinking about the responses from your 3 teacher and the idea that like rising through the ranks is something that's real and significant within 3s. Like I've watched Kelly move from being a teacher to now she is in charge of all of the history teachers that come out of the university. And I think it's important for 3s to remember, but also the people around them, like where's the ceiling there? Like if you are a great teacher, but you need to, like, you naturally rise through the ranks, like where's the stopping point for you? Where is it not enough for you to be a good teacher? And do you need that accomplishment, or do you maybe need to accept that you're really great in the space that you're in, and the achievement is doing it over and over again every year? Right.
Yeah, and I think to glom onto that, you both did a great job of describing this, and that is the 3 who knows the Enneagram and is a teacher can recognize that in themselves. Where is my ceiling? When should I say no when offered more because I'm maxed out on my bandwidth? And also, what if fellow teaching colleagues / administrators knew that about that teacher as well? They see how the teacher performs, but if they don't understand their personality and the motivation behind why, then all they're going to see is teacher's great, give more work. Teacher's great, give more work. And they're never going to stop because the work needs to be done. And you have a select few go-to people to give all of these responsibilities to. But if you knew that they had a hard time with those boundaries or being able to say no when it's not theirs to do, you can stop the ask before you even ask it, knowing that they're maxed out. I'm gonna build capacity in somebody else for a specific scenario because I know my 3 is doing what is theirs to do and can't take on anymore. Yeah. And I don't want to burn them out because that happens a ton in education as well.
I think I'm so glad you're saying that because I did advocate for the title. I think though, if you set them with what they can do at capacity, then you do have to continually tell them good job to keep them there and okay with it. So just to be quite honest, like I wish I weren't such a needy 3 in that space. For the first couple of years, I remember literally walking onto campus like in my suit jacket and having the title of professor and feeling so full of myself. Like that's a high title and it feels great to be, I'm a professor on a college campus and I loved it. And then I realized like what it really is. I feel like I know you're like colleges. Whoo, that's another podcast and like a 3 beer podcast at least, right? But just some of the shine wore off of it and some of my me being impressed with myself wore off of it. And then it can though lose some of the joy. And I just being very honest about that. I'm sure some people are listening and thinking that's so shallow, but some of my joy and energy in going to work were tossing my hair back and saying, I'm a professor and that's a big deal. And then once I had the maturity piece of that and the reality piece of that, some of the joy can be gone from it. And I need a motivation there and that can be hard. So it, again, may sound very shallow, but it's also very true that I need a motivation in that way to want to care about it and think that I am special and achieving and doing big things that really matter and stand out.
So what I heard there also is that there's going to be a difference that needs to be named between for 3s, 2s, and 4s, getting attention from your administration and colleagues and getting attention from your kids and what your expectations are there. And it seems to me there's nothing wrong with any of those types desirous of and asking for attention from their peers and from their boss. That's part of the compensation package if they're doing a great job. And if it's not there, they are right to say this isn't there and I'm going to go somewhere where I get my motive fulfilled. Also, to circle back to the initial thing that you were saying, Billy, about focusing on philosophy of education and definitions of success, all of those are wrapped up here in terms of like your motive is a filter through which you see those things. And the definition of success for the 3, very different for the definition of success for the 2, the 1, etc. And being able to name that, maybe success gets so easily lumped in with 3-ness and what 3s are seeking, but that doesn't mean that others aren't defining success for their classroom internally and have some, which I imagine as we pivot to 4s, we're going to see that. So you working with 4s as teachers, what goes through your mind?
Yeah, in this particular case, the teacher who represented 4s on this campus talked a lot about students being in the right space to learn, essentially emotionally, right? She was very attuned to that. So I think she almost apologized for how little, she doesn't focus as much as she knows that she should on preparation, right? Like the nuts and the bolts of teaching, because it's all about the connection with her students, which obviously is extremely beneficial. You still have to cover your objectives that align with state standards and so on and so forth. But this teacher probably, in my opinion, was the most in tune with her students, had the best relationship with her students. And a large portion of these particular students had learning disabilities or mental health issues. It's a private school, and so they focused on those. And so that made this particular example even more important. Those are the things that stood out to me the most. It was essentially, are my students prepared to learn? Are they okay? Do they have their basic needs met? And if not, how can I meet those? And then let's get into the curriculum. Yep.
Thoughts, Kel?
The hard
Well,
thing
and
there
I-
is, oh, please, TJ, go.
Yeah, thinking about Kelly mentioned earlier the gold stars and having to learn the lesson that like not every student wants the gold stars, and I think that the 4 has the advantage of coming into the room recognizing that each of these people is going to respond a little bit differently to the gold stars, and how do we sort of even the playing field in a way that we're not going to get everyone to the exact same kind of temperament, but we can balance things out a little bit, and we can make sure that everyone's okay to get into the place that we need to go.
And I was going to say that the focus on the relationships and are the kids are okay, I would say is number one. And also, no, they're not okay, and they won't ever be all the way okay to learn. And sometimes you do just have to get going. And that could be, I could see that being a hard place for a 4 to say, I would like to spend an hour with each of my students, really hearing them and their hearts, making sure that they're okay. And when you are doing an education system where you have multiple learners in a room, I don't mean it so dark, but like they're not okay. And they also have to learn and move on. And so there's a limit to that ability. And I could see the 4 feeling very like they're not doing well enough for their students because they really want to look out for them and they just do not have the time and resources to truly listen and see them all and meet their needs. And that would be very hard on a 4's heart, I think, in that profession.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and what I found ironic too is this particular teacher who focused so much on whether or not her students were okay. I think she actually said the words, "And I don't even feel adequate to be able to stand in front of them and deliver these lessons because so on and so forth." Right? Like that's sort of how a 4 sees. It's I can do all of these things, but I can't do this thing, and this thing, right? And therefore, there's that missing piece that 4s cannot help but view the world from that space. Yeah.
Thing that
Yeah, there's a we haven't mentioned this much at all, but the sort of inner focus of the 4, which like we sort of touched on it a little bit with talking about 3 teachers who need that affirmation, who need to be praised, who need to be told that they're doing a good job and perhaps given more responsibility. And there's a sort of self-focus represented there, right? And there is that self-focus as well with 4s. It's just a very different kind. And in the 4 space, they're putting the emotional needs of their students first, and then from that place, not knowing how they are going to actually be able to accomplish this thing. And the self-focus there is very representative in type. And
thing going through my mind as you're talking is this is one of those places where getting the right people in the right seats on the bus, if you can use that metaphor, really matters. 4s are going to be, I imagine, really excel in certain roles in a school and really struggle in others. And so if you this is perhaps too broad a brush, but if you're placing them in as the head of an art class where part of their job is actually pulling students into their emotional life, it's going to be a great good. Or overseeing an English class, we're going to read these texts and really focus in on the emotional life and that being a skill set for them. I liked on the flip side that this teacher was not focused on the nuts and bolts. And I want to bring up, repression again, that the action repression, thinking repression, and feeling repression may just keep coming up in terms of where teachers, this just isn't going to be the teacher's wheelhouse sometimes, if you can name where their repressed center is.
Yeah, and I would argue that's the best work anybody that's studying the Enneagram can do, is find out what your repressed center is, be non-judgmentally aware of that in your own life, and do your very best to bring that up whenever you can. It isn't automatic and it doesn't happen always, but as long as you're consciously thinking about it and working on it, that's the best work you can do.
Is it the case on that? We talked earlier about elevating those, like pushing energy into places where people were being successful. Talking about an individual and saying, here are the places that you actually really are successful, and here are your weaknesses. Is that consistently I'm a kind of push and pull with saying, how much energy do you spend on elevating your weaknesses versus how much energy do you spend really pushing into your strengths and in terms of a mindset? Yeah, thoughts on that?
Yeah, in my opinion, it's 50-50. And another reason why I wanted this focus in particular to be on it, ultimately every educator on a campus knowing their Enneagram number so that it contributes to the culture of that campus. Because I always thought about, I was an elementary school principal, and so you had grade level teams. And again, a lot of the issues I would run into were personality driven. You know, I have 3 first grade teachers, one's a 2, one's an 8, one's a 6, for example. They're viewing things very differently, and they have opinions on what's most important, and therefore they might clash in a particular, on any given day. So knowing their individual Enneagram numbers for existing grade level teams, for example, I can go in and say, okay, as a 2, here are your strengths and your weaknesses, as a 6 and as an 8, so on and so forth. And so I'm getting them to see how their strengths are different and can complement one another, and vice versa, their weaknesses as well. And so instead of trying to put that, that round peg into a square hole, or square peg into a round hole, I always get that one wrong. You can, instead of us banging our heads against the wall, making this teacher do something that they don't necessarily like and aren't as good at as the person across the hall, we can know that information going in and be more efficient about the work that we do. And on top of that, it can absolutely help HR departments when it comes time to hire, right? Like if I lose a specific 3rd grade teacher, and I know that my other 2 3rd grade teachers have this personality and that one, I can keep that in mind, knowing that who I'm bringing in is how they fit in as a piece into that puzzle. And I think that, again, that can be a cheat code with HR departments all over the place, not even with respect to the Enneagram. What if you knew that coming in? I think that would help transitions. It would decrease the chances of there just being not a great fit, and then you have to start the process back over. And all the while, that time and that effort and those resources that are being spent on that process, kids are suffering in that process, or benefiting if you're doing it right. So I think that's important to note as well.
We have a saying in our family, Billy, that no one is allowed to use their Enneagram number as an excuse to be a jerk, although we use a little more spicy language, but and I think it's so important. Like one of your emphases isn't just people study the Enneagram, it's everyone on campus knows their number, which means they've done that work. And I think that's crucial because it's speaking the same language, then understanding something super important about each staff member. And as you're saying, like, so I know a 1, an 8, and a 9 that all manage a building together. And knowing that they have issues about controlling space, all 3 of them, and they're all going to control space in very different ways. And they're all going to communicate about controlling the space in the very different ways. And if you had teachers in there, and we know teachers share classrooms and they're in a pod and they, that happens all the time. If you have that with teachers, that you send in a not 1, 9, or 8 to help them solve a space issue, somebody who doesn't care about space. And so this is, it's so crucial though, that is like my favorite word, it's efficient. It's efficient to have the numbers as the baseline of connecting to each other and communicating with each other, because you start out of space and you can say your number is not an excuse to be a jerk. And you can say, and I understand why these numbers working together are going to have this issue or a disconnection. They're not going to understand. I do not understand controlling space the way that 1s, 8s, and 9s understand it. And so I think that's so crucial for your work, but it's got to be everybody on a campus. The campus has to buy in.
Yeah, and one more thing I want to add, I don't mean to usurp the conversation here, but something you said reminded me of something, and that is yet another reason why I love the Enneagram is because it depersonalizes things. Joey and I, we're blessed. We're leading a cohort this year through Life in the Trinity Ministry, and we're meeting 4 times a year. We've met once. We have another one coming up in a couple of weeks. And one of the tenets, one of the guiding norms in the work that we're doing together is it's not personal, it's Enneagram. And I think that,
Can we get a T-shirt with that on it?
There you go. Yeah, I'll work on those. Get them printed up for next time. So translate that to a campus, right? Like if I walk into TJ's classroom and he's teaching a certain way, I can give you feedback based on your teaching style, but because I know your Enneagram number, for example, I can do it a certain way. And when we're talking about personalities in that context, we can say, well, 9s teach this way, or they planned this way, or they provide feedback this way. I'm not pointing a finger at TJ and saying, you're doing something wrong, you need to fix it. I'm saying because of the personality type that you represent, and here are the characteristics that go into that, there's sort of that safety in numbers, right? It's not, you don't feel personally attacked, because some people do. Some people take things personally all the time because that's the way that they're wired. But when you can refer back to, a group of people that represent that way, the individual doesn't feel like it's personal, right? Like I think there's a better opportunity for growth there and a way to hear it so as to get better and not feel attacked.
And more opportunity for creative solutions.
Sure.
Like throughout all of this, I've been thinking about the 4 who may struggle with putting together some type of lesson plan, to having a structure for how they're going to navigate their day. And it may be the case that the 4 would be a really, really great teacher if their team of other people teaching the same material all created a lesson plan together, right? So the 4 comes in and the lesson plan is done because the team has already done that work, which they were a part of, and now they can put their energy into the emotional awareness and stability of the students in front of them, and then have this thing that they also get to follow, that they did not have to come up with,
Right.
that they didn't have to manufacture, because they're going to struggle with that anyway.
Absolutely.
I think a thing here, Billy talked about HR, and if you could do Enneagram before they even applied, it would be brilliant. And let me just give a little plug for anyone who is like going into the job market or thinks they want to do that or is unhappy with a career. I think the first thing you should do is a deep dive in some Enneagram counseling. Maybe find a life coach that does Enneagram, because there are things that you do and don't want to do. And it's really good to know if that's part of the job. So in schools, you're typically going to have one of 2 things. You're going to come into school, the curriculum is completely done and completely set for you. They give you everything and you teach it. And some people would love that, and a 4 might love that. For example, if they were wanting the relationships but not able, or a 7 might love that because they want to have fun, but they don't want to maybe do the planning. I'm being a little stereotypical here. And some schools make you create it all. And for some people, that's a nightmare. And so you would want to know that about yourself. And this, I think, translates into every career possible. But you have, like, our Enneagram 5 child is currently waiting to hear if colleges will accept him. We're waiting for that. And it took us a long time to even get towards a career path in his mind. And there are things he absolutely knows he does not want to do. Like, he will tell you, teaching for him is a nightmare. Everybody is a moron and they don't listen, they don't do the work, and he would never teach. He hates the idea of that. And that's so good that he knows that right now at 18 years old. Maybe cut out the part where he said he thinks everybody's a moron. That's not very nice that I just said that.
Well, I'm glad you said that too, because our oldest son, Will, he's almost 19. He's a freshman in college, and he is an Enneagram 4. And we've known the Enneagram since before he was born, and so he knows it well. He decided on his number long ago, and he is studying psychology because he wants to be a therapist. Like, that sounds interesting to him because of the fact that he's a 4, and that just plays a large role in that. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's automatic and that it's going to happen. But what you said, Kelly, is great, because it can help you. And instead of just it being so nefarious and you can have one of a million careers, what if you just started to narrow it down?
Yeah.
Start process of elimination based on your personality and get, that specific. And moreover, he's probably going to transfer next year. And there is to Auburn, and the city of Auburn has a program, a student firefighter program, where they will reimburse your tuition if you have a certain GPA. And this was a perfect conversation for us to have with him, because he was interested in maybe joining a fraternity, right? And so we started talking about why, right? Like, there are many different reasons why somebody joins a fraternity or a sorority. For a 4, for Will, even him, it's about authentic connections. And I've never been a part of fraternity. Joey wasn't in a sorority, so we can't really speak to that. But we started talking about this firefighter program, and we landed on the fact that might be one of the most genuine fraternities one could join, because it's centered around helping people and essentially saving their lives. And that bond is based on something genuine and authentic. Not that fraternities aren't, but given the choice between the two, that really speaks a lot to a 4. So back to what you said, Kelly, like if you know the Enneagram from a young age and you're not sure what you want to do or where you should go, if you dive deeply into your personality, your Enneagram number, those kinds of decisions can all of a sudden become a little more clear for you.
Yeah. And what you don't want. I think that's so important, to be okay. It is a noble, wonderful profession to be a teacher. It's totally great to not want to be one. And I didn't know Enneagram until 5 years ago. But if I had known it, it would have been right on my list. I mean, it's been from day one the perfect career for me. I've not shifted careers. I have changed where I teach, but you do get a lot of praise and a lot of feedback. You get a lot of chances to excel. Like I didn't pick it because I didn't know it at the time, but I would go back and probably pick it based on my Enneagram number.
Yeah.
It's not personal. It's Enneagram is a great mantra for an 8 and a 9 for 2 different reasons. A 9 can engage in conflict, and the 8 can smooth things out a little bit. Just respect to everyone's time. I would love to give the skinny on the last 5 types that we have. Maybe just like what's a big thought on each start in terms of the classroom. But when you think about 5s in the classroom, what comes to your mind?
Some of the things that stood out for me, the 5 that I worked with, everything has to make sense. It has to be logical. There has to be a purpose behind why we do it. Lesson planning was an enjoyable part of the process for the Enneagram 5. And one of the statements that she made was, my students do more because I like to know more, right? And so it's a very heady approach to teaching and learning. There's opportunities to take a left turn. If a student asks a question, there's no problem derailing the sequence of the day if it means we're going down a path to learn more. Lots of rabbit holes were discussed there. And then one thing, admittedly, that she said she needed to work on, and that is, 1, just being more social with her colleagues, and 2, being more in tune with the social emotional needs of her students. They were learning everything she wanted to teach them, but she didn't always have that relationship or that personal connection with them. So again, pretty indicative of the common traits of a 5.
I work with a 5 professor who takes the comments for papers and puts them into ChatGPT and says, make these nicer. Because they are they don't mean any of it to be cruel. They mean it to be straightforward. Let's just get it done. Here's what actually happened in that paper. And so they water it down. I actually don't know many 5 educators, but I love them when I see them. I think that they can sometimes be drawn to things that are a little bit more rigid or structured, and schools can be kind of wild. But when they are in there, they are so able to have the student-centered learning like almost no other number, because they recognize the student discovery piece is so key, that they, even if it takes a long time, like you were saying, that they'll go down the rabbit trail, and that will be so meaningful. And so 5s are so wonderful as teachers, but I think they're often not drawn to teaching because that's a lot of people and that's a lot of chaos.
Yeah. And just one more thing too, and that is, I think 5 teachers do a good job of instilling a love of learning in their students because they have it, right?
Yes.
And I think you can just, by osmosis, if your teacher is a 5 and they're always reading and they're always telling you a fun tidbit about something, and I find 5s to be the most interesting in conversations on topics that you yourself don't know much about, because they do. Yeah, and it doesn't matter what it is; they can talk about anything all the time if they're willing and they have the social battery to do that. You can learn anything from them, and it's fascinating. So yeah.
I think that especially as you get higher into education, there's a really interesting place for 5s. Like, because I think there are probably some 5s who sort of fell backwards into education and they maybe shouldn't be there. And there are some 5s that are really great at knowing how to communicate interest. And I had a music theory professor in college that he started every single day with a particular song. And all of those songs, it was different every day, and it was all across the board of what type of music. Day one was Uninvited by Alanis Morissette, and that was like, I know music theory well enough to know that I don't really want to go farther than I already am. And I had to take this class as part of my course study, and that day was like, okay, I actually want to be here because he is drawing something really interesting out of something that I already knew and I didn't think about. And that was this ability to highlight aspects that you didn't know about things that you already knew. And show you the deeper meaning, show you the train back to what happened to set these events up in the world. That like there's if you go deep enough into most things, you'll find something interesting, and fives have that in spades. Like that's where they live, and I think that there is a real value in that, wanting to know more and helping other people see how exciting that can be, how much fun it can be. You said it, the love of learning, because things can be really interesting if you pay enough attention to them.
Yeah.
Work with a lot of fives in my department. The thing, just as an encouragement to fives, the elevating the radar for what's valuable and what's practical can be a struggle, and that's where that some of that rabbit trail thinking, you have 30 open browsers on your computer kind of brain going on there, and really centering in on let's get to things that really have some significance is just an encouragement there. But sixes, what do you say there, Billy?
Yeah, sixes, themes that emerged that stick out to me were all case scenario planning, and loyalty is not the easiest word to sort of wedge in here, but that's what kind of kept coming up. And what I mean by that is I'm going to meet students where they are, and I'm in it with them. I kept hearing that as a theme. And so that essentially to me meant if students are experiencing a particular tough time, a six will take all the time that it requires to sit with them and work through that with them, regardless of what's being taught or learned. And then back to all case scenario planning. And that's something that has been an important sticking point for me. You know, when I learned first the Enneagram, it was sixes plan worst case scenarios. And what I find more accurately is that sixes plan all case scenarios, right? They're not chicken littles walking around wringing their hands saying the sky is falling. They're saying, I'm prepared for whatever. And I got to say, I leaned on my six teachers all the time when I was a principal when it came time for safety issues, for example. We need to restructure the fire alarm evacuation plan. Sixes, let me hear from you, because they would come up with things that I would never dream of as a nine, right? And so that's something that's undervalued in my opinion, right? I think sixes get a bad rap a lot of times because they ask a lot of questions. They want a ton of information. We sometimes patronize them or placate them and say, oh, that just no more questions. Put your hand down, right? Like, we don't want to hear any more of that. But in reality, what they're doing is getting you to think about things that we should all be thinking about. And they're doing that with their students. They're doing that for their fellow colleagues. They're doing it for their administrators. And that's huge because schools, unfortunately, like many other places right now, aren't as safe as they used to be. And we have to work together to kind of protect one another. And sixes aren't just doing that, but they are the glue that kind of holds the social scene together. They just have a natural knack for drawing everybody in, gathering everybody's opinion, allowing everybody to feel heard. And that's wildly beneficial for students as well as teachers.
I have a little wish for sixes, and I wish that they wouldn't be so apologetic. So a lot of the sixes in my life, I think, I said earlier, you know, with the Enneagram, it's not as punitive and there's not a win and a loss, but sometimes I think we paint sixes like it's a loss sometimes. The older language for sixes is more negative. Let me start with that. Some of the older language that they're fearful or whatever. The sixes in my life are the most incredible people who are stable and capable, and that is what you need in a classroom. And Billy, like you're saying, it's not, unfortunately, a very safe place emotionally or physically, even for students at times. And the 6s bring that to the staff and they bring that to the students. And your 6 teacher said they'll go all the way to the end. I think there's very few of these numbers that have the patience and the kindness to go with somebody to the end, to really, truly know a person and to care about them that much. And it's so crucial to good teaching, but they also remain very calm and they are very informed. They have that 5 side to them that they're so informed. And so my only wish for 6s is that they could see how great they are and not, but I have a certain 6 in my life who she apologizes all the time. She's very aware of her 6ness and she doesn't mean to put it on me. And she is talking too much about this. I'm like, I love you. I love the things you're bringing up. They're really thoughtful. And also as a 3, trust me, we worry. We just would never tell anybody because that would not make us look cool, So, but we have those same concerns and those same underlying thoughts. But 6s express them and make sure everyone feels good about it before they move forward. And that's a huge gift to a classroom. And here this just with this 6s, it's student-led and energetic and takes those teachable moments. And this is one of those core things where a 6 is kind of a born to teach personality, or motivation, I should say, is better.
Yeah. And one of the things that sort of stands out to me about 6s, and it's here, but it's not here, is that the confidence that they are unaware of.
Mm-hmm. And the competence, both.
Yes, confidence and competence. And so like the exemplar quotes, I've got a plan B, C, and D on deck.
Yeah.
It's not that I need to have that. It's that I have that already. Like they already have those plans in place. The other one was, whatever's going on with my students, I am in it with them until the end. I love that idea that this is just what they are going to do. It's not a conscious decision. It's not something that they plan for. It's just comes out of them naturally. And I think about, in particular, my partner is a 6. She does not ever want to speak in front of people, ever. She doesn't want to do it in a room full of her best friends. She doesn't want to do it she doesn't ever want to be a representative of anything. She does not want to speak in front of people, but she is a master commander of her classroom. And she is automatically, naturally good at being in charge of her classroom because she knows her role. And there's that getting them to believe in themselves because they've already done all of the work. Mm-hmm. Like there is that part of working with 6s. And I think that comes out a lot in the teaching space. She is very concerned about like her principal seeing her do a good job and all of these other things, like all of these things about being in a school, but she has very little of that kind of concern as like the leader of her classroom. And she brings that not only to like that confidence to her space, but also in protecting her classroom from the things that could happen to it. Like we're talking about school safety, but there's students who are disruptive, and you want to be able to manage those students. Like you need to, as teachers, it's probably part of your responsibility to make sure those students are learning and getting what they need and all of that stuff. But also the rest of the classroom is affected by that. And 6s have that in mind in a big way.
Yeah, something you said, TJ, that it made me think of something, and that is on the 3-6-9 triangle, 6s in this particular case, they do so much work to prepare, mm-hmm. yet they don't trust their own thinking. Mm-hmm. Right? Even though they think through it better than most. Yep. I think 9s do a good job. A lot of times we don't trust our own doing. Mm-hmm. And 3s have unique, authentic feelings. They trust them least. And so it's harder for those 3 numbers to get to that space. You know, I work with a 6 who is in charge of event planning for UTD, and she would create these gorgeous, aesthetically pleasing, crisp documents, like manuals to run a specific event, and then would come to us and say, what do you guys think? And I would say something like, I think I couldn't have come up with 1/10 of this. This is amazing.
I don't have to think. You wrote it all down for me.
Right. But it still doesn't land with the 6. They're like, yeah, but, right? And so again, I think the trick is from both ends, whether you're a 6 or you're in a relationship with a 6, is to get them to affirm their own thinking, to be able to at least for a second trust it because it's there. It's great.
I have a question for you guys because I actually don't know. I know that I need a mirror to tell me who I am. Is that a 6 and a 9 as well? Like, does a 6 need that mirror to tell them who they are? Because I know I need to ask you who I am as a 3, and I'm very aware of that. Tell me that I did a good job. Give me the gold star. Is that what's also going on with the 6?
I think that what happens with 6s is they're looking for someone in authority, and that could even be a friend, I would imagine, depending upon the circumstance, to assuage the fear that they feel of not connecting, not feeling safe, I guess, right? Because they're fear-based. 5, 6s, and 7s are fear-based. And I think the trick is instead of us like swooping in all the time and trying to answer all the questions, and that is to kind of encourage them to think back on what it is that they've come up with and be okay with that thing and not have to bounce it off so many other places and gather that feedback all the time. And to carry that the step further for the 9, essentially for me, it's because we don't trust our own doing. It's back to our presence doesn't matter philosophy. Well, there are times where if I don't own my doing, I'm negatively affecting those around me. Like if I don't step up and take up my own space, that's the term Joey uses all the time. You got to take up your own space, right? And a lot of numbers don't do that because I'm the only one that can do this and this and this. And if I don't do what's mine to do, I'm negatively affecting others. That's the hack for me. That's pushing my buttons in the right way to get me to trust my own doing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's a good word. Last thing for me on 6s is I imagine that the classroom management from 6s is probably exceptional. I don't work with any 6s, but I imagine that if you were looking for master classes, they would probably have that relational processing, and they're looking out for others first would probably be really high. Where are you laughing at?
I'm laughing because they're not bossy and they're not lazy. They're the perfect blend, that.
They're good at keeping students' emotions and feelings in mind while at the same time going, we've got stuff to do.
Yeah.
And they do it both ways. And so you're right. Classroom, we don't have time, but I can provide feedback to my students in a way that isn't going to shut them down. It will still facilitate learning in them, but at the same time, we got to get going. We can't just go down a million rabbit holes. So
TJ, I'm bossy and you're lazy. Did you catch that?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good.
Heard.
7s as teachers.
The themes that emerge for me are what you might expect. Learning has to be fun, straight up. This was the only male teacher. It's just kind of the way that it worked out. He was the 7, the lone male representative of all of these folks that I interviewed. And he talked a lot about how his favorite teachers were the ones that made it fun. And that's probably the case because he's an Enneagram 7, obviously. And so, as you can imagine, his students absolutely love him. And he talked about how he abhors the mundane parts of the job, right? Like the administrative tasks. If it's don't ask me to put together a training, don't ask to take a deep dive into my lesson plans because I only turned them in because you made me. But we're going to get in class and we're going to, I think his words were, it doesn't have to be Six Flags fun all the time, but it has to be fun. Six Flags, the amusement park. But he did talk about times where they'll just, if it's a nice day, we're going outside, just spontaneously, we're going to get out there and whatever we see out there, we'll go down that path. But whatever it is that we do, it's going to be fun. And he also talked a lot about students having their own agency. He talked about fostering independence in them. And 3, 7s, and 8s are in the independent stance, so that makes a ton of sense. He just wants students to show up and take up their own space, as Joey would say, and he wants to instill how much fun learning can be into them. And I think the parts where he struggles are those mundane parts. Like if we didn't quite get to everything in the lesson, it's okay, because we had a good time today. And
I didn't take attendance, no big deal.
Yeah, and so sometimes that can be a big deal and sometimes not. I think the genuine connection with students, I think if students enjoy their teacher and they enjoy showing up for class, what if there are some small gaps in the learning in the curriculum, I think that first part offsets the second. I think if getting students to show up in a headspace to learn is job one, and sevens do that with ease.
You know, we were talking about knowing your number before you jump into a career. And I think this is exactly for a 7 so important, because on one end, teaching changes. It's different every day. It's like notoriously not a clock watching job, except for oh my gosh, the bell's ringing and now I have to let these students go and other students come in or whatever. I mean, that kind, but you know, you don't ever watch a clock in a teaching job and be like, when's it 4:30? You just don't do it. And so for a 7, I think that's brilliant. But I also think it's hard because no matter what, at some point a 7 might feel trapped. And I've seen some career 7 teachers that no matter how much they can innovate within teaching, they might feel trapped. So I'm going to say something that for over a decade I didn't say. Like over a decade I had it. If you're in teaching, you are in it for life and you need to stay in it for life. And I do want to say that you need to stay till the end of the semester, no matter what you do. Please do not leave teaching unless it's an emergency till the end of the semester. Don't do that to a school if you can help it. But to say that you're in it for life is a real disservice to other folks' motivations. And for a 7, maybe it's moving into administrative position, but maybe it's moving into a whole second or third career, and knowing that you will burn out if you stay, because no matter how innovative inside it is, 7s do feel to me like they need that big second and third adventure at times. And I hate to see 7s stuck and then get to the 7 depression space of knowing they're stuck. And so again, like I think incredible teachers, but also just permission for everyone to say, I've served this space very well and these people very well, and I don't necessarily have to be a lifer. And that's sacrilege to how I used to speak about teaching. But I think it now needs to be said, because don't just stay forever if it is a place that you're not feeling the joy and the creativity.
Yeah.
I was thinking a lot about the difference between 3s and 7s, and in particular in relation to metrics. And like 3s want to perhaps want to achieve the metrics. This is the gauge of their success. And the 7s are like, metrics are fine, but that's not why I'm here. But they still might both bring a similar energy to the classroom. And
Yes.
which is very different from the kind of energy I would bring to a classroom. And I for sure do not care about the metrics. Just a very different expression of how they want to engage with the kids.
I think 7s need to know that, though. I mean, this is where, kind of coming to the very beginning of our conversation, you have to know your number and how it impacts other people. And so for a 7, on one end, some of that withholding, you know, I don't know if you're an earning type by 1, but like for an earning type, they might keep chasing it and think that's great. But for other types, it might really shut them down. And so I think a 7 needs to come up with strategies to show care. So I think all of us are old enough, like, let's myth bust that loving somebody is the way you feel about them. Loving somebody is the action that you intentionally do for them, the sacrifices that you make for them, and your time, your energy. And so they can make the choice to love and care about their students, and they can get a system built in there to love and care about their students, and it can be completely authentic. But they cannot say, those feelings are in the way of us having an adventure and I don't care, because kids their prefrontal cortex does not develop until they're about 21 years old, and everything that they're experiencing is teaching them how to behave in the world. And that includes, they could feel over rejected by a 7 teacher. They could be just every teacher has that possibility. So being aware and then saying, I will not negatively impact my students because of what my number naturally desires. I will learn a system to do it. 8s.
A couple of themes emerged for me. One was high expectations. I happen to live with an 8, and so I know that to be true in my own home, but it was reaffirmed for the 8 teacher that I spoke with as well. And then the other was, I think one of the exemplar quotes was, people would consider me tough but fair. Again, very correlative toward an Enneagram 8 as well. And so I think this one might have, it fell directly in line with the common characteristics of an 8 with respect to this individual teacher, and that is the stories that I heard and the common themes that recurred, they have endless energy. So as a teacher, you're off to a good start, because it's draining more than any profession I've ever had is standing and delivering every day. And 8s can do that for days on end. And they're going to push their students. And so similar to 3s and 7s in fostering independence in their students, they don't let them off the hook with anything, because that's the tough love that in their mind they have to show their students. Because if their students leave their classroom and they're unprepared for the next level, that's the biggest slap in the face to the 8 that you could have. And so to do that, they raise the bar extremely high, and they push and push. And I've found this to be true. I think it is impossible for an 8 to see something that needs to be done and not do it, right? They can't help themselves. There's an area that needs to be improved, or there's a task that needs to be accomplished. And we're just going to get that done. And so pushing students over and over and over is how that plays out there. I think she even said at one point, I would get emails from disgruntled parents every once in a while, because they would say, my kid came home and said they keep asking you questions and you're not answering them. And it's not that they're just brushing the questions aside. They're forcing the student to find the answers themselves, because that's important to them as an educator, to prepare them to foster that independence. And in so doing, it can be tough.
Yeah.
Their message can be edgy, and that's, in their mind, that's okay. That doesn't always play well with students or parents or fellow colleagues, but that's the way that they make their way in the world, and they're extremely successful. And this teacher was no exception.
Well, I was thinking about, I know an 8 teacher in particular, and one of the things that we often talk about is that she just cannot understand why other teachers don't care more about the things that she cares about. And I think that is like all things Enneagram, that can be really great and really detrimental, because she is going to be setting an example as a teacher to say, look at how good my students are doing. And it's not because she needs the success. It's because she cares really a lot about her students reaching a sort of, it's not a metric for her. This is something that is important for your life. You need to know how to read and summarize articles. You need to know how to do these things. And it doesn't matter what the test says. These are life skills that you have to have to be a strong and successful person. And in that, she can also set the standard for her colleagues. She can also kind of be a jerk about the fact that her colleagues are not meeting her expectations. But I think that is something that is really clear in all 8s across the board of what profession they're doing. But that shows up in teaching in a really interesting way to me.
Well said.
I think with the 8s are great natural teachers and coaches for other aggressive types, and then they have to remember they're aggressive more than maybe 7s and 3s even. They have to be completely aware that they are aggressive at all times, because they will feel like it's a normal bit of teaching or coaching. Hey, go do this. And for someone who's feeling sensitive that day, for someone who doesn't take direct instruction very well, that can be really hard. And so I love being led by 8s. It's a huge gift. It's one of the times I can say, I don't have to be in charge or try to figure this out, because usually if I go in a room, I am going to be, even if I'm not in charge, I am often put into an in-charge position. And with an 8, I can relax. They're going to take care of it, but they can under-explain the process sometimes, hey, I'm letting you do this. So I think, Billy, you said the parents who are saying they're not answering the question, the 8 only needs to take one more small step and say, I am having you do it yourself, because that's a better learning space for you. But the 8 might be like, no, you're in charge, you do it, and some of the explanation piece can be gone. But the gift of the 8 is absolutely that protector too, that the 8, when they get, and I'm guessing with this successful teacher, that's their classroom, that's their crew, and they are going to take care of them and their learning and their environment. And it's going to be incredible, because the protector side of the 8 is so strong, and it's so wonderful and perfectly balanced with kids. A grown-up who's a good protector and knows how to do it, but also knows how to tell you to go get your stuff done. You can do it, you can handle it. But I know the level of where our relationship needs to be. I know who's the boss, but also go be the boss of yourself. It's a great thing for kids.
I echo the sentiment. Part of it for me is the processing speed. Eights just think 10 times faster than I do. It doesn't have to do with intelligence level. It's just that speed. So there's that. And another saying that we've used recently, and that is clear is kind. And that helps with respect to eights. They care about you, so they're going to give it to you straight, right? And the rest of us, we have a bad habit many times of going to the eight because we know that they can offer the help that we need in direct, blunt, honest terms, and then criticizing them for when they give it to us, right? That's just a perpetual cycle that we go down with respect to eights. I've watched it happen over and over and over again.
And from an administrator standpoint, it's also a joy to coach an eight because you know you can just say it and that they will just take it. And they'd rather, in fact, you better just say it. Not only can you, just lay it out. You don't have to dance around. You don't have to start with like an I statement. You know, it's so wonderful to coach an eight because they will hear it and they will immediately shift and they want you to do it that way. And then also it's water under the bridge. We just handled it. Let's move on.
Yeah, and it's a good trust building mechanism too. And further, it's a way to lose trust. If you're trying to give them the compliment sandwich and keep their feelings in mind when you're giving them feedback, they're dismissing you.
Yes.
They don't even want to hear what you have to say next because they don't believe it. Whereas if you know that they're an eight, you know how they receive feedback best, and it's quick, to the point, direct, firm, and honest, and you give it to them that way, you've now moved up a rung on their and in their perspective, and you need them on your side. Yep. You just do.
I'm on the school board for the school I used to teach at, and a person who was my colleague and friend and a teacher is now an administrator who's an eight, who listens to this podcast. So hi, Schmitzy and Scribic. You better have made it this far in this podcast. But I call her, and she literally starts with, "What do you want, cook?" You know, like that's it. And you're right. I want something from you. And thank you. Here is what I want. And that's how our conversations start. And neither of us are offended. It's like she also is probably walking down the hallway, talking on the walkie-talkie, with a kid in tow. And she's answering my phone call because she's going to also take care of my thing. But that's how it goes, is that what do you want? And there's lots of like warmness and fun joking there, but it's also like, get to the point. I have 32 seconds to listen to you and the next thing is happening. So let's go.
Right.
We're going to finish out nines without TJ, huh?
My people. Yeah. I found what emerged to me was this theme of live and let live, which isn't necessarily a hallmark of effective educators, but it was essentially, there's another level and another way that the 9 teacher was talking about instilling independence in their students, but it wasn't so directly taught, if that makes sense. It was more of a model by example approach, right? Like everything's going to be okay. I got this, you got this, we're all good, it's going to be fine. There were some negative attributes with respect to the sloth. The lesson plans maybe they're in on time, they're kind of okay. Sometimes we follow them, sometimes we don't. But it was also, another thing that emerged was instinctively putting themselves in the shoes of their students constantly, because that's kind of one of the gifts of a 9. And so being able to produce differentiated instruction is a little easier for a 9 than some of the other types because of that. They can respond easily to the way in which students are receiving instruction, adjust well. 9s do that as well. But it was all about us just sort of being okay in general as a class and as individuals. They also found that kind of on par with 6s, they had a good rapport with everybody on campus, and so that made things easier. Other teachers went to this 9 quite a bit for help with various topics, not necessarily specifically with teaching practices, but more so with just the pulse of things that are happening on a campus. And again, to go back to what we said earlier, that matters just as much sometimes as the nuts and bolts of teaching within the 4 walls, right? Like if everyone feels okay and safe and heard and seen, then we can do anything on a campus. And 9s sort of help with that behind the scenes work.
So Billy, I have a different question on this one. Like, tell me how to coach a 9. Because I actually am having some struggles with this, so it's very real, but also because of the peacemaking side, because of the perhaps I'll withdraw and it'll just go away side. And I'm sorry to name some of the peacemaking is great. I'm just saying that's a little bit of a negative, is there's sometimes some ghosting that happens, right? I can send a coaching email or something to a 9 and they'll just not respond or say, we'll meet at some point, and like hope it peters out. So I'd love your advice on coaching 9s and how to, I'm going to say this in a 3-way and please push back, but like, how do I get you to hear me and do what I need you to do?
Sure. Yeah, I think first of all, for 9s, we inherently struggle with the idea that our presence doesn't matter. So whatever it is that we're doing, we think anybody could do this, so why me? Right? There's always that level in whatever it is that we do. And obviously when we are doing our work, we know that's not true, and we are, valuable in whatever roles we're filling. Otherwise, somebody wouldn't have given us that role or put us in that position. So I think that affirmation is important to highlight whatever the 9 is doing well, because what that does is it offsets that thought that whatever it is that we're doing doesn't matter. No, it does, because we're doing something well. So there's that. And then being very specific about the ways in which you need that person to hear how they need to improve, but then maybe asking questions as opposed to giving statements. Because for me, as a 9, I'm a master at deflecting, right? You say, I have to do this thing, and I smile at you, and then I go away. And then I hope that you forgot it. I try to forget it, and then I just carry on about my day, right? But if you ask me direct questions, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to answer honestly. So if you're asking me how I think I should improve, you're going to get my perspective on it. And it might not even be in alignment with yours. So that's job 1, right? That person needs to see your perspective. And then there's some meshing that needs to happen, right? And then it's sort of an agreed upon path toward improvement. And then this is a key component, and that is later is not a point in time. Let's establish a checkpoint when we're going to check back in, and it's a date and it's a time.
Yeah.
Because it's right there and it's black and white. And it's a way for us to come back to the table and measure progress.
Yeah.
So I think affirmation, a collaborative approach to improvement, and then direct specific checkpoints to follow up on progression towards improvement. And I think there's no loopholes for 9s to weasel their way out of that if you set it up that way.
So if you gave me a task and I didn't do it, I would literally feel pressure in my chest. I would feel so upset. Like there's probably 30 emails in my inbox since we started this podcast, and I'm very unhappy about it because those are things I have not done. Do you feel those feelings about I didn't do it, or do you feel the relief of I skated it?
With respect to doing, I have checklists, but at the end of the day, if I didn't get to everything, that's pretty much how my days go, and I'm at peace with it.
You're fine.
And that can be good, and that can be detrimental as well. And so that's not necessarily the buttons to push, for lack of a better term. I think what helps me, what the right buttons to press for me are how what I'm doing is affecting others, positively or negatively. So my lack of doing is harming a relationship with somebody, is hurting our team's progress toward a collective goal, is damaging a potentially damaging a relationship. Those things matter a ton to me. That's where you're going to get me to spring into action.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you add in the lack of, or the fear of conflict. I don't want that conflict with people for something that I have done. And I certainly don't want to be a bad team player, and I don't want to hurt the collective good, right? Because in my mind, I don't matter that much. So when I start to matter that much negatively, that's a problem, right?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for that personal session for me. But also, I want to tell you, I love 9 teachers, and I love 9s in general. And so I just want to affirm to you, do take up space. Your wife is completely correct on that. In fact, you'll know in a staff meeting, people always just want it done. And then there's the person who raises their hand 15 times, probably a 3, because they have to contribute and be seen and all those things, But when a 9 speaks up, I'm like, shh, it's going to be good, because they're taking their time to do it, and they're going to have a wisdom, is almost always how I feel, because they would not do it. They would not put themselves on this stage. They would not insert themselves unless it was going to be good. And there's this huge piece of me that's like, please, 9, speak up. Tell us what you think. Be a part of the conversation. don't just go with the flow. And I realize that's very difficult because I'm saying go against so many core instincts and motivations, but I do want to say the value of it. Like you coming to this podcast and speaking up, I have learned so much, you putting these things on paper. And I'm like, please do more, because I love what you have to offer. And I think what's so cool in the classroom with that too, just to translate it into that, is that the 9 is always going to value that student, and where I'm going to overrun a student and be too excited to speak myself or want to lecture because I'm so full of myself, they're going to really have student voices be centered. And the students are going to get so much space. I think maybe because the 9 knows the student needs to matter, since the 9 themselves wants to matter, they're going to make that a priority. And the student-centered learning is going to be incredible. And you say with your 9 teacher that they're free to be themselves with no judgment. That's true. And that's not true in every classroom. They're judged in some classrooms, and that teacher might fight that. But in a 9 classroom, like, they really are free to be themselves, and they really will feel so praised when they make an effort, not just do it right, to be part of it. So
Yeah. Thank you for saying that, because that does matter. Each student being individually seen, and mistakes are okay, and there is no right way to do things.
Yep.
The flexibility, the adaptability, all those things are helpful in a 9 classroom.
Even the we don't have to hurry up, which is, there's a good balance there sometimes. That's like why I'm saying with the 9 coaching, I might need to help somebody hurry up a little bit, to be quite honest. But we can read that piece of literature deeply and take time on it and actually really care about it is going to capture so many student hearts, that the 9 allows everyone to take up space and the learning to take up space in their room, where other numbers are not going to allow that.
I wouldn't have pursued a doctorate if I wasn't tapping into my secure space. And I wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't be pushing to do more work in the world if I didn't recognize that move. I would just be sort of floating along doing whatever, thinking that nothing I do really matters, when that's not necessarily true. We all are doing something that matters, and I love this, and I want to be good at it. And I'm taking a risk every time I do something like this, because it's not something that I inherently necessarily want to do, but I know is important, and it's the best way to grow. It feels scary. I told Joey recently, when I'm on a doing spree, right, when I'm knocking out tasks and I'm setting goals and accomplishing them, it feels unnerving, right? It feels like I'm almost doing something wrong because it's so unnatural. It's not, right? I'm doing my best and I'm putting myself out there, and I don't always do it, the best way, but I know it's the right thing to do. But it feels weird every time.
I'm so sorry about that. It's the best.
Billy, it's been a delight having you. We are going to put your PhD thesis on our website. You can pick that up at aroundthecircle.org. It will be free to all folks who sign up for a free membership and above. You doing anything else online?
I'm working on a website. I have put together, as I mentioned earlier, a training that is specifically geared for educators. There are lots of those kinds of trainings, but this is an Enneagram for educators training. Half of it will be a know your number, and the other half will be practical application steps to improve your educational performance based on the work that I did on my dissertation. And so when all that's available, I'll definitely put that out there. Some of that work we've put out on @Enneagram Parents, our Instagram page, but I'm working on my own place for all that to go. So the short answer to your question is there a place for them to go? No, not yet, but there will be.
Very readable. I know you had said you want to translate it down from the academic. I found it completely accessible, but still high-level research, which is my favorite. Like, give me the real data and ideas, but do not use the jargon. So I'm just telling you, I think it's in a sweet spot right now. It's very, very readable.
Thank you. Yeah, well, let's put it out there.
Agreed. Billy, it was a delight having you.
Thank you. And thanks for the work that you guys do, and I appreciate the opportunity. You guys keep doing what you're doing, because I echo the sentiment. We need quality folks who are Enneagram knowledgeable putting stuff out there so that others can consume it.
Appreciate that. Friends, Before we sign off, many of you who are detectives will have realized my microphone cut out around Enneagram 7. TJ had to take off around Enneagram 8. So grateful for Dr. Billy Schewee and the great Kelly Cook locking things down for us there until the end. If you are interested in seeing Dr. Shewee's paper, we have it right now at aroundthecircle.org. His entire dissertation is there for free if you sign up for a free membership. All the other stuff, take a look around while you're there. As is said commonly in our intro, college classes, drafts of our upcoming book, all of our full interviews there, including this one. This is the first hour and 40 minutes of the interview. This was actually a 2.5 hour interview. We have another hour of this. If you really got into it, want to hear more of Billy's commentary on his thesis, Kelly's take, and our responses. So do take a minute, go over to aroundthecircle.org, check out what we're doing. For my partner, TJ Wilson, I'm Jeff Cook. And my friends, who you aren't just isn't interesting.